The Rick Altizer Show is brought to you by Navage.
From Nashville, Tennessee, Music City, USA, and the home of hot chicken, it's the Rick Altizer Show. Sit back, buckle up. Rick will talk with the movers, shakers, and creators who put Christ in Christian entertainment. He's a man who's clear so the world can hear. Here's Rick Altizer.
Thanks for joining me today. I have with me a guest today that you've heard quite a few times. It's my son, David Altizer. David, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. Happy to be back in Nashville this week. It's great.
Yes. David lives in California. Mm-hmm. And for those who have heard, he goes by the name Dave Mays, and he has a YouTube channel. He's now with Indie Mogul, and we've talked in previous about YouTube, how to have a YouTube channel, how to start a YouTube channel, how that whole thing works. And so if you're interested in that, you can check out my podcast or go to my website, rickaltizer.com, and you can hear that. And the podcast is called The Rick Altizer Show. But today we're going to do something different. Today we're going to talk father and son. We're going to have a father and son conversation about how to navigate when your son has children and you're the granddad, and kind of navigating some of the boundaries and that and just what that looks like. And so I know there's probably a lot of people listening today that are going, you know what, I've got a son and he's got kids and I'm a new granddad, and maybe you're kind of wondering, how do we do that? How do we do that well? How do we navigate that relationship well? So today, that's what we're going to talk about. And David, thanks for doing this, man.
Yeah, I hope we could find somebody that knows the answers to those questions, because certainly not us. We don't know all the answers, but we have learned a lot. We've got a 3-year-old, Ryan, who just turned 3, and a 1-year-old, Caleb. He just turned 1. They're both born in October. So, yeah, we've had some experience now. I've learned a lot over the years, but by no means are we masters at this. We're still learning.
Yes, I don't want to come off like we're experts in this, because we are not. We're just a father and son who are trying to figure this thing out. So our prayer and our hope is that this helps you, that maybe this is something that you're dealing with as well. So, I can just start off as your dad. When you were a child, mm-hmm. I told you everything you did. I told you where to eat, when to eat, how to eat, what to eat on, what to eat with, mm-hmm. But virtually everything you did, I had some kind of control over and told you, how to do. And so then as we navigate out of that, I become a coach and you start making choices on your own. You get into your teenage years. And so we had all that where we navigated that as father and son. And then you get into your mid to late 20s, you get married and start having children now, 30.
Just turned 30.
30 years old, and are a parent, 2 kids, a husband. You've been married now
6 years.
6 years. I was going to say 7. I know it was 7 or 6. 6 years married.
Yeah.
And so our relationship has completely changed. Talk
mm-hmm.
a little bit first about that, about kind of where you see our relationship now from how it's morphed and changed.
Well, I don't know where you got this idea, but when I was in my early 20s, you took me out to lunch and made this little certificate that said Certificate of Manliness or Manhood.
Certificate of Manhood.
I don't know where you got that idea, but it was a great idea. And I believe you probably did that with Matthew as well, mm-hmm. my little brother. And that was very important. I read a book called Wild at Heart. John Eldridge wrote that. And I don't know if that tied into you doing that, but it was really valuable for me to have that moment where you, man to man, told me, I see you as a man now. You're a young man. You're always going to be my son, but you're not a boy anymore. You're not a child. You're on your own. You're a man. And I see you as a man. And that was a valuable moment for me, and I would imagine it was big for Matthew as well. And there's a lot of men out there who never have had that talk. I know you certainly haven't, mm-hmm. and several other men. And one of the things in the book Wild at Heart that's talked about is that there's different stages of manliness. There's stages of going from boyhood to your cowboy phase to being a man and a wizard or whatever. I don't remember what he calls it. Not a wizard. It's like a something like that.
Right.
So you have different stages of of your life. And a lot of times, even if you're older, you act like a boy or a child, and you're not actually acting like a true man. So that is really where it all started for me. And having that conversation was a big deal to realize that you saw me as a man. And then obviously getting married was a big one as well. I think for all of us, that was a huge shift. They say, a woman stays with her mom and dad until she's with her husband. But even for a young man like myself, even though I wasn't living at home when I was single, there was still this parental relationship, even though I was technically a young man out of the house. But once I got married, that changed completely as well, that dynamic. Now my family, first and foremost, was my wife, and then you guys were secondary at that point. Mm-hmm. So that was the whole thing. I used to go over to your house every Sunday, and then that slowly turned into once a month, mm-hmm. because when I'm working all week, my wife wants to spend the weekend with me, mm-hmm. And I feel like sometimes I would feel bad, like, oh, am I offending my parents or whatever? And and you have told me over the years, like, don't worry, you're not offending us. You need to serve and honor and love your wife. And I don't want this to come across as, Laura wanting to take me away from you or anything. She would never say that. But it's just a dynamic that you have to learn when you become a married person, is putting that person first. Obviously, that's why you want to marry him. Mm-hmm. And I was thrilled to, have that relationship. So,
well, I think that's, for the dads out there, I got the idea of giving him a certificate of manhood. I was watching actually the Kendrick Brothers movie, Courageous.
Oh, yeah.
And they were asking, when did you know you were a man? And, the guy said, I don't know, when I first, different things. I guess when I was turned 18 or, when I had my first drink or, other things. And then this one guy goes, well, I guess when my dad told me I was a man, and that no one had that.
That's good.
And I really thought that, to tell your son, okay, you're a man, and to give him that anchor to hold on to. So I did this certificate of manhood. This certificate, this certifies that David Altizer is officially a man. You're responsible.
It's kind of silly, but it was awesome.
You're responsible for your, to be godly, to be loving, to be kind. This is your relationship with God is your responsibility, and it's all those things. And if anybody actually wants that, I have a Word document that I'll send it to you. Go ahead and just contact me at rick@rickaltizer.com or go to my website, rickaltizer.com, and just shoot me a note there, and I'll send it to you.
That's awesome. It's a great idea.
No cost, nothing. I'll send it to you. But I think that was important to validate that you knew you had that moment now to go mm-hmm. back. Okay, I have this anchor in my life. I'm mm-hmm. a man, and so now it's time for me to start living like one. Mm-hmm. I wanted you to be responsible as a man.
Yeah. And did the same with my younger brother too, Matthew.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about now relationship, father and son. Now that you have kids,
yeah.
Let's talk about our relationship now. How do we navigate that as a father and son? And now you're a father and you have two sons. Mm-hmm. So then, how do you and I travail that?
Well, I think for anybody who's listening and they have kids and now their kids are having kids, just remember how you felt when you had kids. I mean, you were me, mm-hmm. 20 years ago. You were in the same boat, pretty much. 2 little kids and a new wife and, young couple, whatever. So, we want to, as adults, we want to make our own decisions and parent our kids the way that we feel is right. I'm taking things I learned from you guys, and Laura's taking things that she's learned from her parents, and we're parenting together. And I think one of the things that is the most helpful in our relationship is just feeling support and affirmation. And I know my wife, who's a stay-at-home mom, she just loves, when you guys just compliment her, help, because she's home by herself all day with these kids while I'm working, and it's just so stressful. And sure, she's not perfect. She makes mistakes and whatever, but she doesn't want to hear that from anybody. So certainly not her in-laws. So
right, exactly.
It's my responsibility as her husband to be, and also the other half of the parenting situation for our kids for us to make those decisions. I think the best that we could ask for and what you guys have done is just show support and love on the kids and play with them and just be there for them. And, but then also give us advice when it's necessary, when it's needed. And I think that's been on this trip. I've been here for a week now. It's been a successful trip, in my opinion. I think there's been moments where, like last night, we had a late night talking just in the living room, and you guys were sharing some tips and tricks about sleeping and things that you learned, and that was helpful. It was good stuff for us to hear. So one of the things that you talked about before we came out here was let's make sure we got everything up front, in terms of what is expectations on both sides, so that when, the baby is crying at 10 o'clock at night, we're not yelling at each other. It's like one of the things that I asked was that if the kids are crying in the middle of the night, just let us take care of it and not get involved, because then it can just get frustrating or whatever.
It's 2 a.m., the baby's crying, you're already irritated, frustrated, and so the last thing you need is a mom or a dad coming in giving you advice on what to do. Mm-hmm. So just need to break in. You're listening to the Rick Altizer Show on Bot Radio. My guest today is my son, David Altizer, and it's a father-son conversation. He's a dad with 2 young boys, and we're just kind of talking about how we navigate that as father and son. How do we do that? And I know one of the things that we had talked about was about advice. And this is what people want to hear right here. Because this is the stuff.
Yeah.
We've done this.
Mm-hmm.
We've got experience. We've made mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
We've learned things that work and things that don't work. And so on the one hand, we want to share that. But on the other hand, how does that, let's talk about the struggle of that, about how just
sure
what it feels like when your parents are giving you advice on how to parent, when you're not asking for it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was, 27 years ago, and your memory might be a little skewed, and, So there is that, and things have changed. Now we got iPads and iPhones and different things that are involved that didn't exist, when we were young. We also live in California in an apartment, whereas I grew up with a backyard. And especially right now, one of the things that we've talked about is, like, we can't go out. Still in California, the churches are closed. It's insane. So we can't even go to church. The parks just opened up. The library that we were going to is closed. Our church groups aren't meeting because of COVID. We've got these kids all day in the house, and it's like, well, you guys need to just hang out with friends, go to mom's groups, and go play outside. And it's like, well, we can't do any of those things right now. So it's been hard. This year in particular has been really hard. And I think a lot of parents who are experiencing this, even with older kids, having to have school at home and stuff like that. There's a lot of schools that are doing Zoom. I think here in Tennessee, the schools are open, but there's still things happening even here in Tennessee that were just not normal. So it is a weird time to be a parent, a young parent, because it's not the same, But the best times where advice has been really helpful and good for us is when we ask for it. And also when it's not said in anger, almost, like if we're frustrated and angry, and maybe we're even having a discussion about something, and then you give advice as some sort of, period to the end of that statement. That that's not
the all expert, the all knowing,
all
wise.
If only you guys did this,
parenting expert, who. And every child's different, and we feel like we have a sense of understanding in some things, and so Let's. But I want to kind of, if I can, just kind of hone in a little bit on
Sure.
the issue of unasked for advice. I think what I'm getting at is what I've learned, in these 3 years now being a grandparent with you, is that advice is not if it's not asked for, usually it's not welcomed. Usually coming up. I mean, and that really, I think you could make that statement in kind of like any relationship.
Yeah, not just with kids.
It's not just with your kids who have kids. Pretty much in just about any relationship you have, nobody really wants to hear your advice if they haven't asked you for it. People coming up and giving advice. And I think, though, with the concept of when it's your own kids and it's with dad, and there's the sense of, I'm giving you advice almost like, and tell me if this is right. It's feeling like, gee, David, you're doing this wrong. I need to show you how to do this right. And so then there's this feeling of, I'm being criticized. A natural response is to, well, wait a minute.
It's the relationship of, now I'm being put into the child-parent position where you're instructing me as my parent, and now I feel like a little kid, being told what to do by his dad. It's also the relationship dynamic of my parents, not just some other person who is a mentor in my life who goes to my church group who's older giving us advice. That's a different dynamic than your parents.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a tough conversation to have, because I know for a lot of parents, if there's something that's just making your eyeballs pop out because the answer to the problem, and your kids aren't listening, or they don't want to hear it, I think I can imagine that I'm going to be in that same situation myself one day, and it'll be frustrating. I think as men especially, this is a stereotype for men, but it's true, at least for me. I want to fix stuff. If I see something that my wife is doing, she's frustrated or angry, and I know the solution to it, I want to tell her. And often she doesn't want to hear it. She just wants to have empathy. She wants me to show empathy, love, to listen to her. And then maybe, 24 hours later, once things have cooled off, maybe she'll be in a better place to hear it. So I think just being discerning on what's happening, if I'm calling you and I'm, losing sleep, or the kids are yelling and I just want to tell you how stressful it is, those are moments where just saying, I'm so sorry, I love you, I know how you feel, I've been there too, we're praying for you. That's really all we want to hear in that moment.
Some validation and some empathy, and not necessarily advice. Well, if you would just do this, maybe he'd get more, maybe he'd go down. And if you stop doing this, right, that kind of stuff.
And the comparison to me and my brother too, like that's come up a lot, where it's like, well, yeah, Ryan's a lot like you, and well, maybe, but he's also completely different.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Both of our kids are totally 100% different than me and my brother. We might have similar characteristics or whatever, but what worked on me doesn't necessarily work on Ryan, because he is a different person.
Mm-hmm.
So I think sometimes maybe grandparents see their grandkids the same way they saw their kids, because it's genetics. They do run in the same circles. It's the same gene pool, but those are completely different children than your children, and the parents are the only ones spending 24 hours a day, every day with that kid. Even if you do see your grandkids often, you're not there all day, every day. You're seeing the best side of them, because they're going to be their best around the grandparents, because usually grandparents come with gifts.
They love the gifts
and treats.
You're listening to the Rick Altizer Show on Bot Radio, and I'm speaking with my son today, David Altizer, and we're talking about father and son stuff, and him being a dad, 2 young boys, a 3-year-old Ryan and 1-year-old Caleb. He's got 2 sons. I had 2 sons. His sons are 2 years apart. Mine were 3.5 years apart. But so there's a lot of similarities in there.
Pretty close.
But, the thing that I have learned, and I think that was a really great point that you made, is that if I'm calling complaining, if you call complaining, that isn't an invitation for me to start shelling out the advice.
Yeah.
That's really an opportunity for me to give you an ear, give you sympathy, give you empathy. Empathy, that's the word I meant.
Mm-hmm.
And validation. Oh yeah, that's hard. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. And then, so if I have advice though about that,
You can say, "Hey, I got some advice. Would you like to hear it?" Or maybe even later.
Yeah,
in the week or something.
Yeah, I wanted to say, I have some advice about that. Is that something you'd be interested in hearing? Like something like that, where I'm still giving you the permission. And there have been times when I've said, "Would you like to hear my advice on that?" And you've said no. And I went, "Okay," because in that moment that wasn't the time. It's like no, and I wasn't connecting with the fact that right then and there, in that moment, you weren't looking for advice. You were looking for a dad to listen to you.
Mm-hmm.
Give you some empathy and to say, "Yeah, man, I understand. That's really tough."
Well, that brings back a memory when I was young. A teenager. I started doing magic, and I would come in your room and do some magic tricks I was working on, and you would point out, "Hey, I saw your finger there. I saw how you did this and that." And I think at one point I just said, "Will you just watch the trick and say great job?" I felt like over and over, I know you were just giving me constructive criticism, trying to help, because you were seeing things I couldn't see. But I think it's just, again, the dynamic of having a father-son dynamic. You want the approval of your father,
Mm-hmm.
Which ties into the film you're working on right now.
Yeah, the Show Me the Father with the Kendrick brothers. And I think this really ties into prayer. So I'd say for those people listening out there who maybe you're a grandparent, maybe you're a new grandparent, and you're trying to figure out how to do this, and you've got kids and they're doing their best parenting and they're learning and they're making mistakes and that's just going to happen. I think the first thing you do is you pray. I know that my wife and I pray every day for you, Laura, your wife, your two kids. We pray for your marriage. We pray for your parenting, And so, I think those are the most important things we can do is go to God with that.
Thank you.
And pray for that. And then to recognize that if they're talking about some of the things in their life, parenting that are hard, that doesn't necessarily mean they're asking for advice, So to be aware of being empathetic, to be aware of just being someone that they can feel safe coming to without feeling like they're going to get some kind of lecture. If every time they come to you and you're lecturing them, guess what? They're going to probably stop. They're not going to come to you like that, So you want them to be able to tell you, "Man, we didn't get any sleep last night. Caleb screamed all night. He started screaming at like 3 a.m. He screamed for an hour and a half, And that might not be the time to say, "Well, if you did this," or but just to go, "Oh man, I'm really sorry. I'm sorry to hear that." That's got to be tough.
Mm-hmm.
That keeps the channels open, and then maybe at another time, you might want to talk. Maybe you do share something if it's important or viable to them if he wants to hear it. But you
just follow up and say, "Hey, how's that screaming going?" It's like, "Oh, actually, he's doing a lot better now," And then it's like, "Oh, great. What did you do?" And it's like, "Well, I did this and this." And it's like, "Oh, that's a smart idea,"
Well, this went really fast.
Yeah,
we're out of time. I can't believe we're out of time. My guest today is David Altizer, my son. You can get more information by going to Indie Mogul, his YouTube page. Indie is INDY, Mogul, MOGUL. He is the host of that, one of the hosts of that channel where he does camera gear reviews.
Yeah.
And, go subscribe to that and check that out. And you can listen to our other shows by going to rickaltizer.com or checking out the Rick Altizer Show podcast. So,
and email Rick if you want the manhood Word document.
Yeah, certificate of manhood. And thank you, David, for being on the show. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
If there's a show you've missed, you can go to my website, rickaltizer.com, and catch up. Or you can listen to my podcast in iTunes or wherever you hear your podcasts. Just search for The Rick Altizer Show. Altizer is spelled Altizer. I want to thank you for listening. Hey, would you tell a friend about this show and share the love? Be sure to check us out again next week as we discuss how we communicate the gospel through media to our culture. Let's be clear so the world can hear. I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening.